I think you and I, when it comes to NC State in our conversation yesterday, I think it comes down to, as Obi-Wan Kenobi would say, a certain point of view.
Yes.
And sometimes I think that you're so caught up in NC State bullshit that you can't see the forest from the trees sometimes.
That's fair. That's a fair assessment.
But that's you're a product of your environment.
Right.
Okay. You covered NC State. You've been around the program for a long time. You have a lot of connections to the program. So you get a decidedly, I'm not saying anything out of turn here, you get a decidedly NC State point of view.
Yes.
I don't. Now, that's a byproduct of what I've done for 25 years, which has been more about, man, I'm just rooting for the show. Just give me entertainment, right? All that kind of stuff. And I can kind of walk away from looking at things from an NC State point of view all the time. And yesterday, you and I got into, I guess, a little bit of a disagreement about North Carolina, Duke, and you're like obsessed with the misses more than the hits when it comes to,
what do you mean?
Like this idea that North Carolina and Duke are going to find themselves living life like everybody else in the NIL era. And you're making the face as you apply your numbing cream to the back of your neck. All right. I don't see it that way.
Okay.
And the reason why I don't see it that way is because both those programs have shown you time and time again, they are committed. I'm actually going to use the phrase you love to use all the time. The standard is the standard when it comes to Duke basketball and Carolina basketball. And they are not going to suffer losing for very long. If they think that something's not working, they'll go back out there and they'll spend the money necessary to make it work. Now, there are some inherent differences between Carolina and Duke when it comes to money that NC State will never be able to catch. But I think what I'm trying to say is ultimately true about NC State. While I think it's time for NC State and Kevin Keatts to go in different directions after 7 years of not great results for a variety of reasons, but the numbers are the numbers. They're not great. It's time for them to move on. It's really not going to matter if NC State doesn't commit to basketball the way they theoretically want basketball to succeed. Look, I'll actually use a conversation that you and I have had with Elliot Avon a lot of times. Anytime people start getting on Elliot Avon's ass about success, what do you and I both like to point out about NC State baseball?
Oh, well, the money and the facilities compared to their competitors is he's fighting left-handed.
He's fighting left-handed, and he is succeeding while fighting left-handed. NC State problem is that they haven't been able to find a basketball coach consistently that has been able to fight left-handed. So you got to find the lane. What are you going to be? Are you going to find a coach that's going to give you an identity that is different than NC State, that's different than Duke and Carolina, and fight with that hand behind your back? Or is Boo Corrigan, like we talked about yesterday, going to re-envision the program for the next era of college basketball with NIL? But this idea that Duke and Carolina, well, they've been blessed with Hall of Fame coaches. Let me tell you something, dude. At this point, based on how they've been built up, they are not coming back. They are committed to being good at basketball. And they will continue to fight on that hill for that sort of thing, which I just don't see from NC State.
Yeah, I would say, to support your argument, the Matt Doherty years, the standard is different for Carolina.
Yes.
Right? He had the number one team in the country in his first year. He ends up getting fired by his third.
You know where your NC State mentality came through? It was last year when North Carolina didn't make the NCAA tournament after being a number one team. And you're like, they just got to a final.
They literally just went to the national championship.
They were a half away from winning.
Yeah. That's not good enough for them.
That's not good enough for them. It's just not.
Listen, I will say this. Listen, I understand what you're saying about their commitment and I agree with you based on what we've seen. The one blip under Carolina was Matt Doherty, and they did not suffer that bullshit at all.
Hell no, man. They didn't even suffer it with Guthridge.
And you could say,
they went to 2 Final Fours.
And you could say it was about Miss Linda, and you could say it was about treating the players. But ultimately, it was about, hey, we have a standard here, and this is what it is.
Yes.
I don't think Roy Williams gets enough credit, believe it or not, for saving the program in the manner that he did when he came back from Kansas. Never forget, he did not have to leave Kansas and do what he did to save his alma mater, and he did. That's lightning in a bottle twice, though. Dean Smith and Roy Williams is lightning in a bottle twice. Will Duke have lightning in a bottle without Mike Krzyzewski? I'm looking at this more of a 10,000 foot view of these programs.
Sure.
You say they're going to remain committed. They're going to remain competitive. Roy Williams won 3 national titles between 2005 and 2017.
That's special. That's why he's a Hall of Famer.
Lot.
Dean Smith only won 2, man.
I know, but that's a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mike Krzyzewski won 5 national titles in his tenure.
That's why he's the greatest to ever do it.
Between 90 and 15.
Yeah, the best to ever
35 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So why do you think someone is going to be able to match the best that ever did it?
Well, I think we're talking
That's
about
what I'm saying.
I think we're talking about 2 different things.
Carolina, I do think is more of in the Kentucky category, the Kansas category. Those are programs that have proven they could win with different coaches over different eras.
Mm-hmm.
Duke has not proven that they are something beyond Mike Krzyzewski. And spare me, the 77 Final Four and whatever they were.
But I think that
before Mike and ESPN made them who they are.
But this is what I talk about the apparatus that is now at Duke. I think that they are positioned. They are positioned to do it. They have a general manager. They have the money. They have the boot. They have all that kind of stuff.
These are all now. Duke is specifically set up to be successful in this era.
Yes.
In having a Hall of Fame coach is also kind of this concept of another era of college basketball.
Yes.
My sentiment to you about Duke and Carolina is the same sentiment I have for every program in the NIL era. It's going to be extremely difficult on an annual basis to be successful even at a normal standard, let alone Carolina or a blue blood standard.
Mm-hmm.
Carolina in the NIL era has not been consistent.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. That's just a hard fact number right there.
Mm-hmm.
They have a final in the NIL era, 22, 23, 24. They have a Final Four national championship appearance. They have a pox on their family, being the number 1 team in the country in the preseason and missing the NCAA tournament.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now they're back in a situation where they should be in the Final Four this year.
Yeah.
And they're in a situation where they're probably going to win the ACC regular season and could win the ACC title.
Yeah.
Duke in the NIL era. Now Duke is more positioned in NIL and portal, but they haven't really used the portal only because they've been turning over their roster so much since 11.
Yeah.
And that's more in line with what now every program has to do. Okay. So yeah, they had a Final Four team in K's last year in 22. In 23, they win the ACC championship. They won 5 fewer games. This team is going to be if this team makes the Sweet 16, it'll be a successful season, in my opinion.
Sure.
But that's not a successful season by Duke standard.
But they put themselves in a position to be there. That's the point. NC State can't even do that. They can't even do that.
That's fair. But what I'm saying to you is
that's not because Duke and Carolina have been successful. That's not because you've got 2 Hall of Fame coaches that have been making that run the entire time.
You mean this year?
Let's not forget that Tony Bennett managed to carve out his own identity and his own culture at Virginia while these 2 guys were running hot.
And Tony Bennett's about to retire because he doesn't want to do any of this anymore.
Now, I agree. That's a separate conversation. But my point is, there are ways to get in the game. There are ways to get in the game while people act like NC State is the only other team in the ACC when it comes to this kind of stuff, as though other ACC teams don't exist and have to compete with what happens at Duke and Carolina.
Well, I mean, geography, it's a little bit of a different equation.
Dude, it's 2024. Geography doesn't matter anymore. The conference isn't even the same anymore. You're not even seeing Duke and Carolina home and home anymore.
I mean,
you're not.
Carolina.
You're going to see Carolina home and home, fine. But the point is that there are other games that you play. There are other ways to carve out your niche. But I'm saying
that's all under the old.
And NC State has routinely screwed it up. Routinely screwed it up.
Right.
And then they throw their hands up in the air like, well, why aren't we this? Well, have you committed to doing this? And I would say the answer to that is no, they have not, because they're constantly infighting about what they want to be. Constantly. Like Mac Brown came back to Carolina. He learned real quick. Oh yeah, Mac, thanks for coming back and thanks for glad handing all the boosters and stuff like that. But we all know what really runs the show at Carolina. And he learned that again. He learned it back in 1997. He learned it again. Mike Elko basically came in and he basically utilized Duke basketball to help him out and kind of rebrand Duke basketball. You're going to see the same thing with Manny Diaz at Duke. They know what the score is, man. At NC State, and I've been arguing this for 20 years almost, the shift has gone over to football. So what is it that you actually want to be? And I think right now, it looks like football is their priority. And that's fine.
Yeah.
That's not, I'm saying that's perfectly cool. So if football is your priority, then you have to find a coach that can fight with their left hand tied behind their back in the same way that Elliott Avent has to do with baseball, because there's only so much money, man. Only so much money.
I don't disagree with you about the level of commitment. I think what you're dismissive of in these previous 30 years has been the willingness. First of all, you have to have a coach who's willing, whether you believe it or not. You have to have a coach who was willing to come here and fight against those two schools.
Yeah.
And those two coaches. Okay. That was a reality in the coaching business.
And that's weak shit.
No, but whether you want to recognize it or not, it was a reality.
I recognized it, and I've said it, and I'll say it again. That's weak shit.
And so first of all, you have to have someone who's willing to do that. Well, it's not weak.
It's weak.
It's about your next job. No matter how many times I tell you, it's about your next contract. Are you going to have as an individual coach, are you going to have more of a path to success in your own financial security by fighting against Mike Krzyzewski and Roy Williams, or going to Georgia, or going to Alabama, or going to another SEC job where you don't have to deal with those teams?
Well, again, the point that you're making for me is you're acting as though NC State is the only one.
It's not NC State. I'm just saying, when you are in the triangle, you are directly compared to those schools. The benefit Tony Bennett had at Virginia was, while competing with them, and go back and look how many times he actually played Duke and Carolina twice in the same season.
Not a lot.
It wasn't a lot. While competing against them, you're not directly compared to them. So there is a difference. Mike Bray was the same way at Notre Dame. Mike Bray would have been a fantastic hire back in 2005 for NC State, 2006 for NC State. A DeMatha guy, a DC guy who would have said, I give no fucks about competing against these two, right? But that was a reality in the coaching business. What I'm saying to you now is, in the NIL world, everybody is pretty much in the same boat, and it's a year-to-year proposition. And to your point, it's about commitment. You asked yesterday, why didn't NC State get Hunter Salas? The answer, Hunter Salas is making about $400,000 from Wake Forest Collective. So instead of paying why don't they have Rob Dillingham? I could guess that Rob Dillingham is getting close to $1 million from Kentucky. I could guess. I don't know that one definitively.
You either got to be able to find the diamonds in the rough, or you got to be able to commit to what the money's going to be.
Right. So the mistake NC State made this year specifically, taking away all of the other stuff, they decided to pay $100,000 to 3 players instead of going out and committing to Hunter Salas for $400,000. That's the mistake that they made this year. But every year, that's going to be the challenge. And I don't care if you're Duke, Kansas, Carolina, UCLA, Indiana, who are all going through it, by the way. These are all the things that you're going to have to deal with. Next year, Duke gets Cooper Flag, right? Okay. Now that's a year they're supposed to win a national championship.
Yeah.
Cooper Flag doesn't come around every year.
No, he doesn't.
Even in their one and done
and they
years.
know that.
I know they know that, but I think Mike Krzyzewski wins a national championship with that type of player. So we'll see. We'll see what John does.
It's not that easy, dude.
Again, but that's their standard. And that's maybe where we disagree.
And I think where you and I disagree ultimately is NC State stand. I saw this in the YouTube comments. I was going to go through some YouTube comments, but the biggest one that I thought was interesting was, it's pretty telling that people now pine for what the Herb Sendek years were. And that's how low the standards have gotten at NC State. Think about that.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be like that. And talking about Duke and Carolina is, to me, distracting from what the real issues are. Your own commitment to the bit. And I've been questioning that about NC State for a while now.